Tom Golden, in honor of Men's Health Month, I want to talk about your book, The Way Men Heal, because I think it's probably one of the most important books for anyone to understand how men address grief, and especially wives, therapists. Everyone should read it.
Well, thank you, Martin. I appreciate that. I struggled when I first started working and doing therapy with people, with traumatized people. And I struggled because my caseload was primarily men for a couple of reasons we don't have to get into. It was mostly men. And I struggled. I didn't know what was going on because I've been taught in graduate school. You face each other, you make good eye contact, you talk about the past, you talk about feelings. And that worked great with women, not so good with men. And so it took me a number of years to see what was actually going on. That's what the book is about. It's what Swallowed by a Snake is about, too. It's about how men and women are very different in the way we process emotion. How do we process it differently? Because women's emotions, women's reaction to grief is easily seen. Usually it's crying, it's talking about it, it's being upset, but men's is not so easily seen. And that's because it's basically invisible. Most people don't see it. And so when you don't see something, you just assume it doesn't exist. Oh, it's not there. Well, it is there, but it's hidden from most people because it goes, men's healing usually goes through some sort of action or inaction. Either an action where they honor the loss in one way or another, or through inaction where they passively, quietly remember within themselves the things that are they're causing the grief. And through that, they're literally telling the story. I mean, that's what we want to do. Women, when they cry about it and they talk about it, they're telling the story of their loss. And men, when they use action or inaction, they're also telling the story of their loss. They're just doing it in a very different manner, in a way that people can't see. And, people can't see it because men don't want them to see it. And why don't they want them to see it? Because men live in a hierarchy. We live in a hierarchy where, if we show that we are dependent in some way, we go down a notch or two. People think less of us because of that. Men are pushed to look and appear independent. What is an alpha? An alpha male is someone who's completely independent. No one tells him what to do, you know? And so that's kind of the piece of masculinity is we're pushed into this hierarchy where we all try and strive for having as much status as we possibly can. And the book talks about how that happens. And of course, testosterone is a big part of it. We found out now that testosterone is not about violence and aggression. Testosterone is about striving for status. It's about what biologically pushes men to move into this action mode where we strive for status and we use that striving as a means to heal. But it's invisible because most people look at some man having some action. They think, what's wrong with him? Why is he doing something? Why doesn't he sit down and talk about this crap? And there's lots of examples in both books, but especially in The Way Men Heal, about men who this has happened to. One is Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton,
Oh, yeah, that's great.
his son died. He fell out of a skyscraper window in New York City. And what did Clapton do? Clapton, I don't think he went to therapy, but he said he did two things. He went to AA meetings and he played his guitar. And when he played his guitar, he wrote three songs during that time of great grief and chaos. And one was The Tears in Heaven, which most people know about. But there's two other, My Father's Eyes, where he was thanking his son for allowing him to see his father's eyes through his son's eyes because he'd never met his father. And then the third one was The Circus Left Town, which was literally a song about Clapton's grief. It was a song about how Clapton was telling his son that one trip to the circus we took the night before you died, you're going to have to be the only one you're going to have. And if you can watch him play that on YouTube, and if you search The Circus Left Town, Clapton, go to YouTube, you watch him play it, how he doesn't blubber into tears, I don't know. The song is so powerful. But can you see how his action of writing that song was helping him to tell that story of his son's death and his own chaos within, what was happening inside him? So it's just a matter of how we tell the story and men and women are basically different in that respect. And getting the eyes then to see that men have a different way to do it. Once you see that, then everything becomes more clear.
One of the things that I like you brought up is that in the biochemistry of us being estrogen versus testosterone, it's more like a bell curve of 80%. So this isn't like a black and white line, it's more like a continuum. And that's been very useful for me. It's like someone might have this, might, there might, could be a woman where this approach is more useful and another. So it's not like this, it's just black and white. And I want people to understand that because you give room for the diversity of life that exists. What I'd like you to do is, if you wouldn't mind, tell that one story of a man who lost his wife and did a carving. I think that's a beautiful example of doing.
Actually, that is on the cover here. You see the carving in the middle. That's Clapton's guitar. That's Michael Jordan's basketball. And in the middle, the carving is of this man's wife. And after his wife died, the man plopped a block of walnut down on the family's kitchen table. And he proceeded over the next year or two to carve his wife. And so his children watched as their mother appeared on the table. Just a beautiful, beautiful story. But can you see how that man, this is an activity he did, and by every time he took a chunk out of that, he was thinking of his wife. He was there with his wife. He obviously teared up as he was making it. He was processing his loss in the same way someone might process their loss in a support group, but he chose to process it by doing this carving, a beautiful, beautiful carving. The thing about the men's action is it's not just action that helps men heal. It's action when you pair it with honoring. So he was honoring his wife by doing that carving. Clapton was honoring his son by doing those songs. So almost always you'll see with men, they'll have an action, but the action is connected to some sort of honoring. And the two together are powerful. That's what makes both working together very powerful and healing. Because it means something. It has meaning to the men and to the women. I was going to say the very first page of The Way Men Heal, first paragraph, I talk about how this is not a men-woman thing. This is a human thing. And actually the book is not all about men versus women. It's all about how can you tell when someone has an active mode of healing or a passive mode of healing. And because everyone's different, there are going to be women who are going to grieve in the same way that the men do, and there are going to be men who grieve in the same way that women do. I think it's about 20% of each are like that. So we need to honor those people just as much as the people who do the standard way of healing, you know?
One of my favorite stories of experiencing it, I've experienced it so many ways. I'll share some of them, but one was I remember a friend that I've known since apparently we met pre kindergarten in a sandbox. Our parents met.
Good.
I was visiting, and his dad had passed away, and his wife said, he's the rock, and he hasn't grieved. And I said, yes, he has. She says, what do you mean? Because she knows I've always been more emotional of the two of us. Okay, if you put us together. And I said, come here, and what has he done since his dad died? And she said, well, all he's done is completely re-landscape the backyard. and Tom, I could barely tell this story without getting choked up. I mean, it was so profound. And I said, it just came to me. I said, where did he play with his father? And you could see she saw it. That was his grieving. It was clear to me, knowing your material, that was his grieving right there.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of a woman who came up to me after a workshop I gave. She said, Mr. Golden, can I tell you a story? I said, sure. She said, and she told me this story about how after her mother died, her father and three brothers tore the house apart. They redid the entire house. She said, I thought they were crazy until I came to you today. Now I know what they were doing. They were redoing the house the way the mother wanted it to be. They were doing it in honor of the mother. Oh, oh, just beautiful. Men have the most beautiful actions they do. I mean, and people don't see them. They don't connect the dots. So once you see this, you start connecting the dots. You start taking your hat off to men, saying, "Yes, that's a really good way to tell your story and to grieve."
Okay, so where can they get this great book?
Amazon.
I'll put the link below, and let's get the conversation going. I have my own book coming out, Taboo: The Lost Codes of Men, and that should be out release before Christmas. But let's get this conversation going. I just want to challenge people that maybe we collectively have an unconscious bias to not hear men's pain, and that this shifting could make a profound effect on boys, fathers, and especially wives and women.
Sounds good to me.
Good. Thanks, Tom. This was great.
You're welcome, Martin. Thank you. We'll see you.